Start with the first round here. Nothing too crazy at the top of the draft where Aaron took Christian McCaffrey, but your intrigue started right away at the second overall pick where Dalton Del Don took New York Jets running back Brees Hall. Andy, your thoughts?
Yeah, my first thought was that this is just a classic Dalton Del Don, look at me sort of showy pick, right? Dalton making the whole thing about himself like he does.
Yeah, noted showboater Dalton Del Don, sure.
Yeah. So like Brees Hall obviously is a first round pick. I do think like who goes number 2 is an interesting conversation in fantasy this year, right? Because you can certainly make the argument for CeeDee Lamb, you can make the argument for Tyreek Hill. I don't think it's perfectly clear that Brees Hall is the second running back after Christian McCaffrey. I do think it's clear that he belongs in the first round, and there's a group there with Taylor and Bijan and certainly Hall, where like you can have the conversation. I think Hall is an interesting player to talk about because his. And you know this, obviously, because you were riding Brees Hall in a handful of leagues where he led you to titles, right? Like,
shout out to me, yes.
Great play, shout out to you. That was mostly willed by you. Like, how much of it was Matt Harmon? How much of it was Brees Hall? Do we even know? Is that answerable? I can't.
0% of it was Nate Hackett, so I will take more credit than Nate Hackett for sure.
So, like, you know how weird his season got at the end, and I think there's a conversation about how that will translate to Aaron Rodgers being at quarterback and the 2024 Jets, right? Because he finishes his year with like a 39 touch game, Matt, 37 carries in his final game and huge yardage total. I don't know if they were trying to get him to 1,000 yards. I'm not sure what the story there was. He came up just short, whatever. Great season. He also had like those Trevor Siemian weeks. He's just peppered with targets, 16 targets, 9 targets. The Tim Boyle weeks weren't too different, right? And so now we're coming into a season, and like that was awesome. And then Brees Hall finishes as I think all the hardcores know this already. Led the position in targets, led the position in receptions and receiving yardage. Is he going to be the centerpiece of an Aaron Rodgers led passing attack? I think that's a more interesting conversation because they add Williams. They draft a rookie that they're excited about in Corley. They've got Garrett Wilson, who deserves 160 targets. So like, I think Brees Hall can get there in a better offense, right? I think he can earn this draft spot. I just think he's going to deliver numbers probably in a different way. But he's an interesting conversation starter, I think.
Yeah, my initial reaction was going to be I'm willing to sacrifice a few catches or targets for a few more touchdowns. But he did score 9 touchdowns last year, and in a really broken offense, which I think you can say like, okay, well, how in an Aaron Rodgers offense, how many touchdowns is he going to score? Can he push closer to 11, 12? I think that's possible. I think he's a really dynamic player, which is an important crux of this conversation. Like, I think we love the player Brees Hall. Now, maybe this is because you brought up the passing work and overall, like, I think he's going to be better as a runner. I think he's going to be more effective as a runner in this the second season removed from the ACL. That's just like, generally that's how these running backs work. But because you brought up the receiving work here, I do think it would be a mistake to remove too much receiving work from Brees Hall. Like, I think even though they add Mike Williams, he's still the second best, I would say, or the second most dangerous pass catcher on the team beyond Garrett Wilson, because we just don't really know what we're going to get from Mike Williams. And maybe I'm galaxy braining myself on this, Andy, but it's May. This is when we should galaxy brain ourselves. You mentioned Malachi Corley, who they do seem to be in love with. The Jets social media team is literally tweeting slow motion highlights
seriously
of routes on air, and he's running a freaking screen route. I was like, all right, we've jumped the shark. Normally I'm okay with just having fun with, May or whatever routes on air highlights. Although I sometimes I roll my eyes on Twitter, stuff like that. But I was like, yeah, we're jumping the shark here. That is a screen route, my guy. And he's running 2 steps. Like we don't need to slow-mo this one. Okay. So that's the type of player Malachi Corley is going to be. He's going to be a design targets type of guy. I wonder if he's actually, again, maybe I'm galaxy braining myself, Andy, but does Malachi Corley end up siphoning some of this receiving work away from Bree Hall? Because for the most part, with a guy like Hall, you're having to design these targets for him to get to 95. Like, not all of those are going to be check downs. Some of them will be, but not all of them. Are those design targets going to go away from Bree Hall and be on Malachi's Corley plate? Because I kind of think that's a mistake.
Yeah, no, that's another part of the Bree Hall conversation is that these weren't like unproductive targets. I mean, the guy was averaging almost 8 yards per catch, right? And he caught everything. So these aren't like wasted targets. I'm not suggesting that at all. I just don't think, he just had like his year was so oddly shaped, right? And he gets almost a third of his total yardage in the final 3 games of the season, which fine, they're going to come somewhere. You're going to have big weeks somewhere. And he just, that chunk of time with 2 quarterbacks who are just not even going to be part of the equation this year. He gets like 43 of his catches in a 6-week period. I don't know if it's going to look exactly like that. We haven't really seen. I don't know. You can argue that Aaron Rodgers hasn't had a guy exactly like this before, although I think that Aaron Jones is a pretty dynamic receiving threat. We just haven't seen him. Aaron Rodgers hasn't given us a vintage Alvin Kamara. He hasn't given us like an Austin Eckler type monster receiving season out of a running back. It could happen for Bree Hall. I'm not like, I don't actually hate the pick. I just, more than anything, I just love like clowning Dalton Del Don, and any opportunity you give me to poke and prod at choices that Dalton makes in fantasy, I'm gonna take advantage of it. I just think Bree Hall is one of those super interesting kind of swing players in drafts.
Yeah, overall, I'm pretty cool with Dalton making the pick here. I would probably personally go some of these receivers ahead of him, but no arguments from me in terms of Bree Hall second overall. Okay, the rest of the first round. Tyreek Hill, pick number 3 by Dan Harris. Bijan Robinson goes to Kate at pick 4. Mo takes CeeDee Lamb. You take Justin Jefferson. Interesting to hear your thoughts on Jefferson with a rookie quarterback. And then right after that, you wanted to highlight producer Colin, the 7th pick overall, takes Puka Nacua. So, Andy, Justin Jefferson, Puka Nacua, these 2 picks here.
Yeah, Jefferson. First of all, like that guy played with after the Kirk Cousins injury. It was such a rogues gallery at quarterback for the Vikings. He still finishes with 1,000 yards in 10 games, which I think just underscores his absolutely ridiculous talent when healthy. There's so few doubts for me with Justin Jefferson. I actually really like, and the more you sort of dive in on JJ McCarthy, at least for me, I'm pretty convinced that he can support a couple of viable fantasy starters. I don't know that McCarthy himself will be that guy. But I don't really have many worries about how Justin Jefferson is going to perform. I think he's as good as it gets at the position. Still crazy young. Still an ascending player. So no questions about Jefferson. I thought Puka, obviously Puka is coming off 100 catch, 1,400 yard season, as good as any rookie has ever been. Him ahead of Jamar Chase, to me, was kind of a wow moment. Him ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown, kind of a wow moment. We'll discuss some other Colin picks. Producer Colin, shout out to him for making this mock draft interesting. It felt a little out of sequence to me.
I'm not sure whether I want to let Colin off the hook, because I think he's the podcast producer. Like, he could just be doing this for team content, which I would appreciate him for. But I'm not 100% sure I want to let him off the hook. So I'm just going to, and since Colin can't speak for himself, I'm just going to say that I'm not sure whether he does this for team content or not. And I'm just going to leave that there.
I will say, I kind of, I was having a Twitter back and forth with Kate, and kind of maybe I sideswiped Colin just a little bit in the conversation, and he jumped in, and man, Colin already had he'd gone into notes, and he'd written up all of his picks in this draft, and then he hit me with a Twitter thread. These are my talking points on all of these picks. Here's why it was the right move.
I didn't see this. I'll have to unmute Colin on Twitter and then and go check.
Yeah, we'll just temporarily
Yeah. Obviously, he'll be instant blocked right after that. But for now, yeah, I'll make sure to check that out.
So he was fully prepared to defend all these picks. And again, like Puka is coming off a historic rookie season. Like I don't think it's crazy out of sequence. I guess in my mind, the sort of, you're in the first round and everybody's got a very high floor. And so we're not even really thinking about that, except maybe the running backs, but all the receivers have very high floors. I guess I don't think of Puka's like 99th percentile outcome as being the same as Jamar Chase's or Justin Jefferson's, but you could talk me into it. He's coming off a great year.
I don't personally have a problem with Puka in the first round. I mean, ADP wise in early best ball drafts, he's wide receiver 6. He's the 9th overall player off the board. I'm not too concerned with him going in the first round. And like, I think it gets dicey after him, right? Like I think AJ Brown, is his 99th percentile outcome really higher than Puka Nacua at this point? I think he's better. I think he's a better player probably, but that's only because I've seen more of AJ Brown than I've seen of Puka Nacua. I think I could, at the end of the season, if Puka continues on the trajectory that he was on, I think I could say that I'm there in terms of those guys being neck and neck. And I have some offensive ecosystem questions about Philadelphia. Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor. I'm just thinking of ADP wise, not guys. As you mentioned, Chase and St. Brown. We'll talk about Chase here in a second, but like these guys, do they really have a higher ceiling than Puka Nacua? Maybe for Jahmyr Gibbs, I think he does have some face melting upside, but there are some clear downsides there as well.
Yeah, I've got no quarrel with Puka as a I think in a lot of the best ball drafts that we see, we're talking it's a little bit safer in full PPR. If Jamar Chase hits his ceiling, is his ceiling 18 touchdowns, 20 touchdowns, I think maybe, right? I just think the best possible case scenario for Chase, to me, little bit higher than Puka. And again, there are some other receivers there where we've already seen them deliver multiple seasons that are as good as what Puka just gave us. But he's in this club. This is the right conversation for him. I don't mean to suggest that it's like some, Colin made some much wilder picks than Puka Nacua, so we don't need to get bogged down in this one.
Jamar Chase was wide receiver 13 last year. He was wide receiver 5 in his rookie season in 2021. Obviously, he dealt with injuries in his second season. He is a very fascinating player. He was my pick right after Colin took Puka Nacua. I took Jamar Chase in the first round here. He is interesting just because he was wide receiver 5 as a rookie, and I think that was still kind of like his peak season. But man, I just think about, and I've said this a lot, I'm going to say it a lot in the lead up to the season, so I am sorry if you hear me repeat this or you already heard me repeat this. I feel like Jamar Chase is going to have a season, like a career high in slot snaps this year. Just you look at the construction of that Bengals offense. They still have T. Higgins. They take Jermaine Burton in the third round, who I guess could be a speed slot receiver, but when you look at his profile on reception perception, you look at what he did at Alabama last year, he was a pure outside vertical receiver. And I think that's like, as a man coverage beater, that's what he's going to be in the NFL. So in 3 receiver sets, we could see Jamar Chase doing a lot of he's not going to be a 70% slot player, but he could do some CeeDee Lamb stuff. And that's just going to raise his floor and his ceiling. So if I had to bet on a guy that hasn't been the number 1 receiver yet in fantasy that could be that this year, if Joe Burrow just stays healthy, because he was productive last season, was Jamar Chase, even without Joe Burrow. If Burrow stays healthy, if Burton is able to establish himself as not a feature player, but just a guy that can get on the field in year 1, man, Jamar Chase could easily have just a ton of targets. And again, they could be higher yield and higher efficiency targets just based on where he's going to line up.
Yeah, that really feels right when you say it. Again, not that he's going to turn into, Curtis Samuel or whatever, but he, the idea of Jamar Chase as somebody who's 60% outside, 40% in the slot, something like that'd be really fun. And it's hard for me to imagine that Jamar Chase isn't going to finish his career with at least one, 1,850 yard season, ridiculous 16, 18 touchdown total. He's he's just that electric. You think back to the best moments from his rookie year, like that just all seemed on the table for him, and it still seems on the table for him now.
First round finishes up with Jorge taking Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I think if it was me, I'd probably take Amon-Ra St. Brown over Puka, but it's at least a conversation. Jonathan Taylor was the last pick by Scott in the first round.